Math is what music is. In fact, it stimulates your analytical side of the brain. Since you're attempting to evoke a feeling in someone through music, I've always referred to it as emotional mathematics. Even though he helped create two of the greatest rock bands ever, Gregg Rolie's name is rarely the first one that comes to mind. He provided the voice of Black Magic Woman and was responsible for bringing the original Oi Como Virginia and Evil Ways tunes to life. A talented keyboardist who helped create Journey, where he was also the lead singer, and who later introduced Latin rock to the Santana fame. However, Carlos comes to mind when someone mentions Santana. Steve Perry and Gregg Rolie are called out when you mention Journey. He was present, silently, modestly, but irrevocably. Gregg Rolie never sought attention for more than 50 years. He discreetly left the spotlight, reappeared in silence, and kept inspiring with every note he played. There will be no scandals, gimmicks, or surprising headlines, just music and a life dedicated to it. Rolie never donned the label of a legend despite being twice inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an honor that is only given to a select few. He just had an honest, modest, and unwavering life as a musician. This is the story of Gregg Rolie, an artist who emerged from the shadows and made a lasting impression on history without the need for fame. Early life. Gregg Allen Rolie was born on June 17, 1947, in Seattle, Washington, a city famous for its rain, where his reflective disposition appeared to be shaped early on by the peaceful, reflective afternoons. However, Gregg grew up in a middle-class family that was neither impoverished nor affluent. Shortly after his family moved to Palo Alto, California, a place known for its sunlight, top-notch schools, and the blossoming American dreams of the post-war era. Despite the fact that they were not artists, his parents always urged their son to listen to himself. And Gregg did just that. He sat in front of an antique piano while other children played baseball or were fixated on Hot Wheels, learning chords one by one with patience. Instead of striking him like lightning, music came to him steadily. He didn't study under any well-known instructors or go to a conservatorium. He gained knowledge by listening to Ray Charles, Bo Diddley, and Chuck Berry. Every solo was an opportunity to broaden the scope of his inner world, and every record served as a classroom. Gregg was a quiet student at Cumberly High School who enjoyed technical drawing and briefly thought about majoring in architecture. However, it was the evenings he sneaked out to practice with William Penn and his friends, his first garage band, that really made his pulse race. The rebellion was not limited to adolescence. He couldn't resist the calling. It was an awakening. He didn't have a difficult upbringing. His melodies were devoid of ancient wounds and family tragedies. Perhaps, though, that very serenity served as a springboard for the reflective music he would eventually produce. It's the kind that stirs the soul deeply without having to yell or flaunt itself. Gregg Rolie's music was not influenced by a difficult upbringing. He raised awareness early on that great work doesn't have to be loud. Early career. Gregg Rolie met Carlos Santana, a young Mexican guitarist with eyes that seemed to look into another mystical dimension. In the late 1960s, while California was experiencing a surge in anti-war protests, hallucinogenic vibes, and a cultural yearning for freedom, there was no greater contrast between the two. Gregg was a logical and orderly individual. Clear melodies, succinct words, and tight arrangements were his favorites. Carlos, however, performed music as though he were attempting to communicate with the cosmos. His guitar solos, which looped in a state of near-meditative trance, may go on for 10 minutes. Perhaps, however, it was just this contrast that produced a genuinely unique blend of Latin, psychedelic, blues, and rock. Contemplative but gritty. They founded the Santana Blues Band in 1966, which was subsequently abbreviated to Santana. They performed at bars, clubs, and outdoor festivals during the ensuing years. Santana made his debut at Woodstock in 1969, when hundreds of thousands of people congregated on a muddy field in upstate New York. Gregg Rolie's voice erupted from his Hammond organ while the guitar screamed and the Latin percussion thundered. They created a new legend. While he wasn't the frontman of the band, Rolie's thick, raspy, and powerful voice became the sonic identity of songs like Evil Ways, Black Magic Woman, and Oi Como Virginia. In a band full of diverse cultures, he was the silent conductor, using his playing to ground what Santana risked losing in its philosophical and spiritual endeavors. Unquestionably, the 1970 record Abraxas was a high point, but as the attention grew, so did the cracks. Carlos Santana started to reflect. He began incorporating meditation, spiritual teachings, and freeform jazz into the band's repertoire after being influenced by Guru Sri Chinmoy. Rolie became worried. The audience was falling behind, and the music was becoming less focused. In the studio, tensions increased. Carlos desired to play freely and unrestrictedly, to jam. Rolie desired songs having a beginning and a middle, as well as structure, and a conclusion. Their arguments continued well into the night. Occasionally, they ceased talking. Rolie later noted that although we were still creating music together, we were no longer truly listening to one another. Members started referring to their concerts as spiritual warfare on stage as a result of the stressful environment. Carlos saw the band as a means of achieving enlightenment. The only thing Rolie desired was for the song to genuinely touch people's emotions. Gregg Rolie quit Santana in 1972 following 3 albums and hundreds of performances. No emotional farewell, no news conference. He gently but firmly left the way he had come. Music no longer felt like home, and he could not stay there any longer. It was hardly a loss when he left. It marked the start of a new, equally amazing chapter in history, a voyage named Voyage, and a moment of integrity, where Gregg Rolie would once more ascend to prominence and create a new rock voice in the 1970s by creating the second chapter, Journey. Gregg Rolie didn't go lost after leaving Santana in 1972, but he also didn't jump into anything too quickly. Resigning from a band at its height meant letting go of innumerable prospects, money, and fame. Rolie, however, was never one to seek attention. In order to determine whether music was still his calling or merely a memory, he needed time to listen to himself. He maintained contact with Neil Schon, the young guitarist who had played with him in Santana, during that calm time. Both individuals believed it was time to start something new after becoming enmeshed in Carlos Santana's progressively spiritual perspective. A band that plays music instinctively and isn't under any pressure to be philosophically revolutionary. Together, they established Journey in 1973 with the goal of advancing rock to the nexus of emotion and technique. The band's initial focus was on complicated experimental music and progressive rock combined with jazz fusion. As the band's lead vocalist and keyboardist, Gregg Rolie put the iconic Hammond B3 at the forefront of their sound. In 1975, Journey's first album was released, an entirely instrumental progressive rock effort. The lead singer, with a blues rock voice that was forceful, honest, and dry, and the main pianist, with his deep, swirling Hammond tone, was Rolie. The Journey album was a musical manifesto for a band that refused to compromise, even though it wasn't a commercial success. Examine the Future in 1976 and 1977 carried on with the band's musical experiments, but imbalance started to show. Columbia Records pushed the band to find a more approachable lead singer since their music was perceived as being too intellectual for general audiences. It was a little but hurtful blow to Gregg Rolie, the iconic voice of early Santana and now Journey. Commercial pressures increased. Additionally, Steve Perry, a young tenor known as the rock equivalent of Sam Cooke, was brought into Journey in 1977 following a string of difficult internal meetings. Gregg Rolie greeted Perry with clarity rather than bitterness. He was well aware of Perry's business potential. His tenure as the primary voice of Journey came to an end at this point. A new era was ushered in by the album Infinity in 1978. The main vocalist was now Steve Perry. Rolie took a back seat and concentrated on the keyboards and background vocals. Without a doubt, though, Gregg was Perry's tutor in those early days, enabling him to keep internal rhythm, comprehend the band's language, and keep quiet conflicts from becoming actual riffs. Maybe that was something only Gregg could have done. With singles like Lights and Wheel in the Sky, Infinity was a huge success, and its creator knew when to back off. Journey's subsequent albums Evolution, 1979, and Departure, 1980, helped them become one of the best arena rock bands in America. Rolie, meanwhile, was losing steam. He played out of duty due to demanding tour schedules, studio demands, and a developing disconnection from the band's initial musical essence. Gregg Rolie decided to depart Journey in 1980 after finishing Departure. There were no complaints or drama. He even recommended Jonathan Cain, the Baby's keyboardist, as his own replacement. The Hammond B3 was given to Rolie himself in a low-key musical succession ceremony. He was not pushed out. Like a conductor stepping off the stage after finishing his own symphony, he made the decision to step down. "I'm proud of Journey's success, but I was no longer truly part of it," Rolie once remarked, "and didn't want to lose my integrity just to keep going." He returned home, where his wife Lori and their 2 young children were waiting. And for nearly 2 decades that followed, he lived without platinum albums, without sold-out tours, but with things no stage could ever offer: peace, truth, and family. The quiet years and the return after leaving Journey in 1980, Gregg Rolie vanished from the rock spotlight. No new singles, no TV appearances, no headline-making interviews. To the public, it may have seemed like he was done, but in truth, it was just the beginning of a new chapter, one reserved for things that didn't need to be loud. He returned home and did something he hadn't truly done in nearly 20 years, became a husband, a father, and simply lived a normal life. In a home near Austin, Texas, he drove his kids to school, played music in the evenings, and read books in silence. No stage, no audience, no pressure. But music never left him. In 1991, Rolie made a quiet comeback, not under blinding lights, but among old friends. Alongside former Journey members Ross Valerie and Steve Smith, he formed a band called The Storm. There were no blockbuster expectations, just seasoned musicians reconnecting with the joy of playing, for passion, not the charts. Unexpectedly, the single, "I've Got a Lot to Learn About Love," climbed to number 6 on the Billboard mainstream rock chart. The Storm achieved quiet success, but it was enough to prove one thing: Rolie was still here, and when he chose to, he could still create something that made people stop and listen. However, the band's second album, Eye of the Storm, was indefinitely shelved by Interscope Records. The market had shifted, grunge had taken over, and artists like Rolie seemed out of place in a generation that no longer believed in Hammond-driven love songs. Unshaken, Rolie returned to his roots. In 1998, he reunited with former Santana bandmates, including Michael Shreve and Jose Aries, to form Abraxas Pool, a group steeped in the spirit of Latin rock. Their debut album was a nod to the past, but also a declaration. Those who once created magic at Woodstock could still craft music that stirred the soul even past the age of 50. Abraxas Pool didn't last long, but it gave Rolie something invaluable: a sense of reconciliation with the Santana era, a period he once left behind with inner conflict. For the first time in nearly 30 years, Rolie played the old songs with old friends. No more tension, no more artistic clashes, just music and mutual respect. Solo career. After years as a frontman, co-founder, and lead vocalist for 2 legendary bands, Gregg Rolie embarked on his solo journey with an entirely different mindset. Not to create hits, not to become an icon, but to express himself authentically. Raw, free, and without the need to please anyone. In 1985, he released his debut solo album, Gregg Rolie. It was seen as a personal, musical manifesto after decades spent in collaborative settings. The album leaned into AOR album-oriented rock and classic rock, blending his signature Hammond-rich keyboard textures with smooth guitar lines. The song "I Wanna Go Back" didn't chart prominently at the time, but would later become a hit for Eddie Money, a quiet testament to Rowley's enduring and underappreciated songwriting talent. 2 years later came his second album, Gringo, 1987. Compared to the debut, Gringo was a bolder statement. Latin rock returned to the forefront, interwoven with elements of world music, funk, and jazz rock. A way for Rolie to revisit his Santana roots from his own unique perspective. Though not heavily promoted, Gringo was praised by critics as Rowley's most character-rich album, showcasing a fusion of past and present, technique and feeling, Latin percussion, and classic keyboards. After a long stretch focused on family and occasional performances with The Storm and Abraxas Pool, Rolie reemerged in 2001 with Roots. The name said it all: a return to his musical origins. The album brimmed with blues, soul, and jam band influences, with Rolie taking on roles as vocalist, keyboardist, and producer. It wasn't an album made for mass attention, but for living truthfully through music, unpolished, spontaneous, and unconcerned with radio play. Roots became a favorite among devoted fans, offering a deep personal look at an artist weary of the industry, but still in love with the essence of music. It wasn't until 2019, nearly 2 decades later, that Gregg Rolie released another album, Sonic Ranch. Recorded at the renowned Texas studio of the same name, the album is a culmination of everything that defines Rowley's sound: subtle Latin undertones, strong classic rock roots, keyboard-driven storytelling, and a voice no longer fiery with youth, but weathered and truer than ever. Songs like What About Love and Don't Be Cruel feel like confessions from a man who once stood in the spotlight and now finds companionship in music itself. Though no longer celebrated by the media as in his Santana or Journey days, Gregg Rolie's solo career is a return to essence. No lavish studios, no pushy producers, just him. His familiar Hammond B3 and stories told in chords, not to be praised, but simply to be heard by himself. Personal life in a world where rock musicians are often associated with fiery romances, messy divorces, or constant scandal, Gregg Rolie stands as an exception. Not because he never lived in the spotlight, but because he always knew when to step out of it and when to keep a place for himself where he could simply breathe. He married Gregg Rolie in the late 1970s, just as his career with Journey was taking off. They met on a flight. Rolie was a flight attendant and Rolie a touring musician. It wasn't a whirlwind Hollywood romance, but rather a steady relationship built on understanding and respect. Together, they made a choice rare in the world of touring artists to put family above fame. After leaving Journey in 1980, Rolie made a decision few musicians at the time dared to make. He became a full-time father. He once said, "I didn't want to be the man known only through music magazines, but a stranger to his own kids." He and Rolie have 2 children, a son and a daughter. During the 1980s and early 1990s, while his former Journey bandmates soared commercially with hits like Open Arms and Faithfully, Rolie was remodeling a home garage into a music room, teaching his kids to play instruments, and driving to parent-teacher meetings. And when his wife Rolie wrote a children's book series, Meme's Little World, inspired by their family, Rolie composed the background music for the audiobook versions. The way he contributed, quietly, behind the scenes, never seeking top billing, mirrors the way he has lived his entire life. Not needing to be seen, only wanting to be part of something meaningful. The Rolie family lives near Austin, Texas, where he has his own studio, a small garden, and a life slow enough to still hear the echo of a Hammond organ on a quiet afternoon. Though he once led thunderous performances at Madison Square Garden, today his joy comes from casual jam sessions with friends, moments when his grandchild asks, "Were you really famous?" and sunsets that no longer rush him. He's never made tabloid headlines, never had to issue a public apology for personal mistakes. Perhaps because, for Gregg Rolie, silence has always been a choice. Not because he couldn't make noise, but because he never saw the need to. Legacy and influence. Gregg Rolie was never the kind of name that graced magazine covers on a regular basis. He didn't lead a cultural revolution, didn't spearhead a movement, didn't pull rock into politics or spiritual doctrine. But he accomplished something that very few musicians in the history of music ever have. He helped shape the signature sound at the birth of not just one, but 2 legendary bands. With Santana, he was the original lead vocalist, the soul behind Black Magic Woman, Evil Ways, and Oi Como Virginia. He didn't just sing. He was the heart of those early tracks, the hands on the Hammond B3 that brought Latin rock for the first time to major American stages, from Fillmore West to Woodstock. While Carlos Santana looked to meditation and the cosmos, Rolie kept the music grounded, anchoring it with blues rock roots that made it accessible even to audiences who'd never heard a conga drum before. With Journey, he launched an entirely different chapter, American progressive rock. Technical, powerful, and built for stadiums. The band's first 3 albums, though not commercial hits at the time, laid the foundation for what would become one of rock's most successful acts. And when Steve Perry stepped into the spotlight, Gregg Rolie quietly stepped back, manning the keyboards, singing harmonies, and maintaining internal harmony during a sensitive power shift. Not many artists who once led a band could do that. 2 bands founded, 2 sonic blueprints laid, 2 exits made when he no longer felt he belonged. And for that, Gregg Rolie has been inducted twice into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in 1998 with Santana, and again in 2017 with Journey. A rare honor, but one well-deserved for a man who chose silence over self-congratulation. His influence doesn't come from grand statements. It comes from the sounds he left behind. The blistering Hammond B3 that opens Black Magic Woman, a voice thick as cigarette smoke yet filled with feeling, the solid, unshakable keyboard foundations behind flashier stars. It's the influence of someone who didn't need to stand in the spotlight to be a pillar. Gregg Rolie didn't rewrite rock history, but if you look closely, you'll find his signature on the opening pages of at least 2 of its greatest chapters. Present life. At 77, Gregg Rolie no longer appears on stage every night, but that doesn't mean he has stopped living for music. On the contrary, he's now living with music more fully than ever. No pressure, no limits, nothing to prove. He and his wife, Rolie Rolie, reside in a peaceful home near Austin, Texas, where mornings begin with gardening and late afternoons often end with a light jam session in his home studio. No more grueling tour schedules, no more studio deadlines. Gregg Rolie has chosen a life that steps back from the world while staying deeply connected to the one thing that has always made him feel alive: music. In 2024, he made a surprise appearance at a community music event at the University of Texas, where he collaborated with the Longhorn Marching Band, not to perform a Santana or Journey hit, but to share wisdom and guide students in playing from emotion rather than just technique. For him now, passing on inspiration matters more than performing for applause. In October 2024, he was honored by his local community as an artist of lasting influence, not only for what he achieved on stage, but for the kindness, quiet strength, and enduring spirit he continues to embody. People no longer call him the legend of Santana or the founder of Journey, just Gregg, the artist. In a rare 2023 interview when asked about his musical legacy, he simply smiled and said, "I don't think I left anything that big behind. I was just lucky to be in the right place with the right people and to listen to the voice inside. Music doesn't save the world, but it saved me." He still plays the keyboard every day, still records new songs, even if they're never released, just to keep his heart from growing dry. He continues to support Lori's children's book series and educational charity projects. He still has the habit of sitting on the porch at sunset, sipping tea and occasionally pressing play on one of his old recordings, smiling. Still sounds all right. Gregg Rolie doesn't seek an audience anymore, and yet, somehow he still has one. Those who grew up with Black Magic Woman, fell in love with rock through Wheel in the Sky, and found in him something rare in this world: unwavering grace without the need for display. He was the first voice of Santana, the voice that led the world into the vibrant landscape of Latin rock, the trailblazer for Journey, laying the foundation for one of the most successful American bands in history, the only artist inducted twice into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yet choosing a quiet life in Texas, surrounded by family and an old Hammond B3. In an industry where people often have to shout to be heard, Gregg Rolie chose a different way: to play, to step back when needed, and to return only when the heart called. He is proof of a simple but lasting truth. Pioneers don't need to stand in the middle of the road. They just need to carve a path and let the music, like water, find its own flow. Not everyone standing in the spotlight is a legend. Some, like Gregg Rolie, only need to stand behind it and still manage to light up an entire era. If you've ever loved a Santana track or hummed along to a Journey melody, chances are you've quietly passed through the world Gregg Rolie helped create. And if you'd like to keep discovering the untold journeys of music, don't forget to subscribe, because the best stories always begin where no one's looking. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.